Good evening, everyone. I think we shall start now. Welcome to Cooper Gallery's online event accompanying the Trinity Boyle Wolfe Drawing Prize 2020 exhibition, currently on show at Cooper Gallery. My name is Sophia Howe, and I lead the program at the gallery, which is a part of Duncan Jordanstone College of Art and Design, University of Dundee. So it's fantastic to see so many of you are here with us for what promises to be a very exciting evening. So I'm now delighted to introduce the speaker of this evening's event, artist, writer, and educator Adam Benmakhlouf, who describes themselves as a documentary fantasist working in drawing, sound, writing, teaching, and programming. Their practice embodies and experimentally represents nuanced strategies of world building, born of necessity and hope by queers and Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color. So this evening, Adam will share with us how they use drawing as a means of recording and imagining alternative and radical relationships, sexualities, and lifestyles. So now I shall hand your screens over to Adam.
Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. Great. Thanks, Sophia, for the introduction. So I do a lot of different things across different spaces and places and communities and organisations. So inevitably, I'm going to pick up on different bits of work and ways of thinking and making that intersect with drawing. But really tonight, I do want to speak about all the kind of like specific possibilities for representing and thinking and being that drawing allows for. So the overarching way that I'm going to structure how I'm going to talk tonight is quite principles based, and I'm going to speak a little bit about all the kind of different foundational intentions I have for the work I do and that I make. So when I'm talking about principles, I mean sort of like motivations and intentions that underpin what I do across different roles and identities and personae that I'm glad to kind of involve myself in different days of my week and parts of my life, especially just now actually. So to start with, I'd say that I always kind of, start with and go from principles of radical social justice. And I think unpacking that as this huge idea really feels like it's become a practice in totality for me. And thinking about all the kind of areas and the spaces and the people and the relationships that these kind of politics that I'm talking about, what they look like and what that involves and what is made possible by thinking and loving in this way in lots of ways too. And simultaneously, I also want to think about practically, how do you use materials when drawing and or even scheduling a workshop and the educational work that I do. How do I express these principles and the materials that I use, or how I work with sound or write or paint. So at points I'll also take a wee bit of time to just address some of what's happening and the pictures that are going to be running alongside what I'm saying. But I'd also like to say that if there's something that kind of just sort of comes and goes without much ado and you'd like to hear more about it, there's going to be lots of time kind of throughout, and especially at the end, to just sort of raise your hand and ask about a certain drawing. I'll maybe rely on sort of Alison, Peter, Sophia to sort of give me a wave if something does come up in the chat that I should be aware of. I've got my script and I've got the visuals up as well, so thanks guys if you can do that. But yeah, this kind of push and pull between thought and drawing, which is going to happen in this presentation, is something that for me is really productive and challenging to a certain degree as well. So yeah, just a little word about what's going on as I'm speaking now. So I decided to do this expanded drawing collage instead of a PowerPoint. I think for me this idea of the slideshow. It feels quite academicized, and sometimes feels a little overly formal as a means of presentation, but it also kind of smacks of like maybe a sort of touristic shading of shots of something exotic, and I think that kind of background of it I don't like. So yeah, I thought I'll try this instead, and I think it looks a lot like maybe a big sort of board you might see in kind of like a community space where everyone's posted up adverts or maybe like drawings or paintings by kids or a community group. So that's kind of more my bag, I think. So I'm not doing anything with this drawing at the moment. I've got a lot of good help from Aileen, who's navigating it. So we're in a wee bit of a choreography tonight. So at points, things might come and go in a way that is a bit like sort of improvised or aleatoric, but there's sort of key points where what I'm saying is meant to be next to the drawing that's up, and sometimes I'll kind of flag that, and sometimes it'll just sort of come and go. So I'll be talking about lots of sort of avenues and details of my very wide intention to represent and imagine lives that are committed in a material and daily way to social transformation, that nurture forms of identity, community and relationships that are porous, fluid and widen networks of self-care, emotional support beyond usual circles of association. So in a bit of a like negative example, I think I'm often working against sort of habitual social trends of having like a sense of self, or even like friendship groups that aspire to a sense of homogeneity, a kind of aspirational set of ideals around perfect median incomes or age ranges or sort of neurotypes or whiteness. And it's often it's quite often that going beyond these kind of relationships isn't something that's encouraged, like even in general ways, like with media representation, what you see in films and TV. So yeah, today I'll be talking about motivating principles in my making, and I'll be presenting lots of drawings, some of which are from exhibitions. Some works haven't been shared before, and there's just lots of examples of drawn from my daily practice, really. And yeah, they'll speak to the points that I'm saying out loud in different ways. So how I'm going to begin with is just with this statement that came up when I was working on, quite intensively working on this sort of animation that's still a work in progress. So I've got some of the cells from part of it here. I don't know if there was like an official lockdown at the time, but I was very locked in and kind of like thinking about my work and thinking about imageries, and really spending a lot of time with the film that these drawings have come directly from. It's a work by the animator Gillian Lacey, who was one of the founders of a really influential group, the Leeds Animation Workshop. And yeah, this film was shown in Channel 4 in the 80s. It's just about 7 or 8 minutes, and it's this story of this kind of like angel that resurrects this sort of murdered queer woman, and they kind of go to her trial and they heckle the judge as he kind of like speaks in such like misogynistic ways, and the whole script is made up and collaged from real life court trials where sort of women have been killed by their spouses, and the kind of like horrible lies that are told about them, and kind of like these sort of double standards of what it means if a woman drinks, and how that can like lead a man to rage and kind of let, you kind of get men off the hook for murder. So at the same time I was thinking about abolitionist thought and sort of strategies of extrajudicial accountability. And yeah, these kind of all kind of came together, I think. And yeah, this sort of statement of intent came around, which I'll just read out. And I kind of sort of like wrote it down in block capitals on this sort of failed animation cell. So how it goes is, I often feel out of time, too early for the wonder to come, too late for ancestors forgotten, radical lives. I draw to populate my life with the futurity that for me is posthumous and the past, socially repressed and oppressed. They are plans, dreams, and survival strategies. So it's written on this failed animation cell, which you can see a little detail of where something had gone wrong while I was pairing the image, and it was meant to be someone breaking down into tears and being comforted by another person next to them from this scene in this animation. And it kind of, and I think another way of thinking about it, I was writing a text to my 20 last night in response to a conversation about going swimming and really missing it, and I said, but this feels like such a good kind of missing, to feel missing, such a powerful place between grief for the past and a motivated longing for what you want in the future. And yes, I think these kind of ways of engaging with a sense of lack around you, or like emotionally with a feeling of longing sometimes, or a sense of absence, I think for me this activates and kind of puts to work feelings of being out of place as a sense of grief for lifestyles or identities that have been suppressed or oppressed and or repressed in response to violent systems of oppression and theft. And I think it might be one of the reasons why so many of these pictures that I do and the drawings that I kind of revolve around and kind of subject matters are about people together. I think in so many ways being in an extended community and like the ways of doing that have been lost through systematic processes of erasure, through legally sanctioned killing and censure. And yeah, I'm trying to sort of document and imagine nuances of relationships that are often collapsed into this overarching term, friendship, which is really useful, but sometimes really groups together very many different ways of relating to one another that often just don't fit sometimes. I think that, through drawing I can sometimes sort of pinpoint moments or kind of like charged sort of rapports that can sometimes come and go without even being noticed or perceived, because there's just not a language for it anymore, or not yet. So, and yeah, just in a sort of terminology point, I also, kind of shy away from this idea of chosen family as well. I don't really use it a lot. It's kind of a contemporary lingo that I think often just reasserts family relationships as this aspiration or something to be aspired to, the measure of all connections and networks. And I think, for me and a lot of people, when it comes to like my own family relationships, they've actually become all the better from applying ways of loving that I've learned first and foremost from friends and from spending time with friends that I love a lot. So a lot of the visions of being together that I like to make, they're trying to kind of repair this sense of strife, which is the presumed condition between strangers or people that aren't in your immediate social or familial unit, that you're somehow in competition with or threatened by. I think more often than not, there's a sense that if you're soft with someone else that isn't in this sort of safe zone, there's a risk that they're going to exploit you or harm you. And this suspicion, I think, really structures a lot of sort of social constructs and lines of kinship and support, or lack thereof, within communities. So another part of what I would like to kind of happen in this meeting is that if you have the will, I just like to get you drawn a little bit. So I think this is the first of 4 prompts that I'm going to just give, that you can just listen to, or you can kind of take up your pen and paper. So I think this is something that is useful, I think, for me, and I'm kind of hopefully going to share, which is, I think the terminology of friendship covers a whole host of relations in kind of a ham-fisted way. and it kind of generalizes and makes approximations between very distinctive and delicately scaffolded rapports. So for the first sketch or drawing that that maybe we can do together, I would ask that if, and however you can or want to, using your drawing materials, find some way to kind of draw like an instance of friendship, or a vision of it, or maybe in an abstract way, or maybe it could just be somehow one person or two people or more. So if you want to kind of listen along and do that, I'm going to keep going. But so that's the first of tonight's 4 drawing prompts that'll come up. So so the next thing I'm going to talk about is drawing and really how it relates for me in quite a kind of like interesting way with other sort of lens-based media, and the decision to draw instead of filming or photographing. And I think for me it is one way to really loosen the hold of lens-based representations like photography and film. And I like to make the most of its possibilities for more fluid and comfortable ways of representing situations and people. So that's not to say that I don't take a lot of photographs, which I really, really do. But I just think that sometimes it often feels like, I think maybe that's why I'm so conscious of it, that I often have this instinct a lot of the time to take a photo in moments and then realise how much of an imposition it can be for the people around. It can be triggering for people, it can put people on guard, it can make people feel really alert, especially like in moments of sort of safety and feeling relaxed, which are often the times when I want to do something to just make a little memo of it. I think being documented or recorded can sometimes break that sense of real deep chill, and it can make you kind of change your posture. It can change how you're holding your face. It can you can lose control of your facial muscles sometimes because you're just so self-aware. So I've got this huge personal archive of snapshots, but they're mostly taken under the condition that I don't reproduce them in a kind of publicity way. But like I do like sharing them in that sort of IRL, having a cup of tea, looking at photo albums together way, but not for exhibitions and reproductions in that way. But I think there's a lot more going on there than just how like some of the people I know around me feel about the camera or respond to it. I think it's really indicative actually of the history of photography and its relationship, especially sort of medically, socially, with systems of control and violence, and now with like different ways body cameras are used, and CCTV, just this sense of surveillance and power. I think all these images that we take, even though maybe we suspect that like they might not be looked at again, or they'll go in a file for many years, there's always a sense that what if someone saw this that you didn't want to see it, and kind of like judged you, and it sounds so kind of sensitive or maybe paranoid, but I think in a real way it can just sort of interrupt like spaces of safety, and it can just bring a sense of being walked in on all of a sudden. So I think one of the drawings that'll come up is it's me and a friend, and she just sort of squeezing some of this sort of skincare product onto my hand, and it's from she does a lot of very in-depth research on what she uses in her regimen every day, and she's just sharing this sort of nice serum with me. And and I think it's one of the sort of daily drawings that I do, and it's just, for me, it was a really nice way of hanging out. Like we were looking at each other, and we were sort of looking in the mirror at the same time, and I think recording these moments for me is a way to archive them and to note them using drawing, and sometimes keep them as a way of maybe seeing something in them later on that I don't fully recognise at the time. And I think yeah, I think going from memory, there's some losses, you know, like, but yeah, I think it does allow for a certain kind of like noting of visual details, and yeah, I think it's also quite, yeah, I like the way that doing this is this almost like band of characters that start to recur across like the photography and the drawing that I do, and like Catherine in this photo is definitely one of the people that just sort of keep coming up. But the other kind of mode, I think, yeah, like, so kind of after thinking a lot about lens-based representation, one other medium that I kind of relate to a lot in a really kind of generative and positive way is audio. And I think it kind of, there's a lot of parallels in the ways that I really like sort of sound culture, and I'm recording and field recordings as another way of documenting, again, kind of getting away from sort of film and photography. And I think, yeah, I've been interested in recording audio, especially of these kind of like relaxed, comfortable, sort of chatty environments. So for almost a year, me and a really good friend and collaborator, Isabella Shields, collaborated on a podcast called Breaking Up. And it's a lot of things, but primarily it's a document of us chatting, and I really like it as a snapshot of this part of our lives together as friends, and just talking about films and TV and books and giving advice to each other and whoever else is listening or written in. And I think, yeah, in a kind of really nice parallel way, there's this sense of like kind of being represented but not having to be directly seen, and we get to edit it, and there's these kind of, yeah, like, yeah, I think with its relationship with John, I think I do get that sense of a kind of like sort of protective urge to kind of like show these kind of very like important moments or encounters or thinking together, but also not to give them all away, you know. And I think, yeah, there's something about this sense of, and the drawing, that these kind of where the title came from, these unfaithful renderings, that there's moments of imperfect proportions or exaggerations, and I think it just does this thing of sort of shielding the kind of the full vision, or the full kind of generous giving of something quite tender. And I think, yeah, that notion of audio, and kind of, and just giving one part of an exchange, it really appeals to me, because I think you kind of get everything you need from it, but you don't necessarily have to give everything you might not want to share. And I think with the John as well, this sense of being really implicated is quite important to me as well. Like, with that idea of them being these unfaithful renderings, I think it also activates like this sense of my hand being in them, and kind of like decision making, and a certain kind of bias or something, yeah, something not totally trustworthy in one sense, you know, of like, you can kind of see that maybe they wouldn't like match up to a kind of photorealistic representation of what it is I'm trying to show. But I think this kind of subjective presence is really important to me, and again, kind of getting away from that idea of the sort of neatly and comfortably obscured neutrality of like sort of mechanical recording, and lens-based media particularly. I think, yeah, there's a sense of wanting to have a sense of the looker or the person that was involved in seeing or making this vision. Yeah, and I think with that as well, this sense of working in pen a lot of the time as well. For me, there's this idea of a bit of a like sort of performativity of it, that you get this one chance to kind of get it right, or if you get it wrong, somehow trying to kind of hide that, maybe in a way, or find a way to kind of incorporate that. I don't think, yeah, pencil hasn't been a way of making drawings for me ever, really. And because I think there's this, it kind of, I like that drama of making a mistake as I'm making, and having to, yeah, try and like incorporate it somehow. And I think, as someone who just like, when I get the option to erase something, just like uses it too much, I need to kind of put that away from myself somehow. And I think, yeah, with that sense of not being able to sort of readjust certain like, yeah, accidental ways of enlarging or kind of drawn something at an angle you didn't expect. Like I think for me, it really begins this sort of psychodynamic relationship with the work where it starts talking back a little bit in this way that can be quite uncomfortable, and reveals relationships with what it is that I'm drawing. And I think rubbing these out feels like such a loss to me. So I kind of I just like taking it off the table at all. And I think as much as pen often feels indelible, I think there's also a sense of these drawings as like singular versions of the image that they are meant to be as well, and kind of part of often like series of things that I'll come back to. Like I kind of showed an image there that kind of prompted this thinking when I was putting the document together of this singer, and kind of in a club and singing this sad song, so I think this thinking about performing well drawn came from this image. And this was again a kind of an image that came in different versions. So this is the second one that's just coming up now, and there was something really I think these two drawings have kind of meant a lot to me over the last year. They kind of came with a thought, and they kind of brought this thought that sounds, it's quite easy to say, but it kind of it felt quite heavy or poignant when it came around. And it was this idea that that even like the saddest song, which I imagine these singers are singing, they're always performed by, or often performed by, a singer who has the wherewithal to carry a tune and the energy to convey heartbreak, often at the same time as feeling it. And it's an idea that's sort of come back recently, because I've been reading Roland Barthes' Morning Diary, and it's just these collection of short thoughts in this daily way that Roland Barthes notes down. And it begins at the day after of the death of his mother, who was for a long time, and especially at that point, a real centre of his life. He'd been looking after her for, I think, at least 6 months in a very intensive way, just taking care of all of her needs every day. The kind of the only person he would often see. And for me, there's this sort of meta level of poignance, as well as this beautiful writing that he produces, but just the very fact that he kind of shows up to do this writing and kind of manages it in these circumstances. So like as a document of that, it feels really powerful to me. And I think that kind of really comes comes to the fore for me in this idea of daily practices, especially of drawing. And one of the artists in the show that I'm here to kind of speak next to, the Trinity Boy Wharf Drawing Prize, Nancy Hasn't Chance. I think her work speaks a lot, really, really sincerely, to this idea of what it means to, in a daily way, record loaded or poignant moments. Here's a detail of one of the drawings. I'm really touched by the way that bodies are represented in these works, and kind of like the sort of the postures of them, the weight of them, and the shape of them, and how they sort of lean over and into one another. And there's just these really careful depiction of care and support work and looking after others. And in these moments that Nancy's sharing, I think this kind of really draws out again that idea of the kind of like how essential drawing can be. The idea that someone else could be in that room at that moment and recording that somehow and using another medium, like especially like a camera or something, it just feels so like it would just absolutely break the kind of what's been shown there. And I think there's just a level of empathic communication that comes out, especially in Nancy's drawings, that that just beams out in a way that I don't think any other medium could quite get with that subject matter. And yeah, so I think moving people who like I kind of look to and kind of really take a lot of inspiration from. I've got kind of two panels up from the artist Julie Doucette, who made this comic book called Dirty Plot all through the 90s and was a real someone who was really, really involved in alternative comics culture around especially North America at the time. And yeah, it kind of started off as it was meant to kind of get released 4 times a year. And then because of her kind of really meticulous way of making these images, it sort of fell down to once a year and then once every 2 years. And but at the same time, she just gained so much respect and renown as an artist. But they're just, I think what appeals to me often in Julie Doucette's work is this depiction of a really kind of like, what is unabashedly meant to be this alternative lifestyle. In a lot of ways, it's a very kind of over romanticized one. It's a sort of New York based artist. But yeah, this idea of sort of populating these compositions with like debris and detritus, like dirty socks and ink pots and empty beer bottles. So like as the comic went on, it became increasingly autobiographical. It started off with these kind of surreal dreamscapes and stories of kind of animals and things she saw on the street, but then by the end it just becomes this really intensive narrative of the end of a tumultuous relationship with her partner at the time. And I think what really appeals to me of this way of working or this way of representation is the way that Julie Doucette really kind of like patiently and committedly documents this alternative lifestyle that she is a part of and living at the time in this small cluttered apartment. And for me, like, this is kind of getting to this importance of like everyday detail, and to kind of make a big sort of leap through time and through culture. It really brings me to this 1962 interview by the poet Sylvia Plath about what it is that she really kind of started getting from writing novels as opposed to poetry. So I'll just maybe read out a little excerpt from that. So what she said was, "I feel that in a novel, for example, you can get in toothbrushes and all the paraphernalia that one finds in daily life. And I find this really more difficult in poetry. Poetry, I feel, is a tyrannical discipline. You've got to go so far, so fast in such a small space, and you've got to turn away all the peripherals. I like my little leres and penates. I like trivia. I find that in a novel, I get more of life, perhaps not such intense life, but certainly more of life. And so I've become very interested in novel writing as a result." And then she goes on to say that anything could get into a poem, but I just can't put toothbrushes in a poem. I really can't. And and I think, this sense of what can and can't enter like certain frames of culture, really in Doucette's work, and also like in the bell jar, and seeing the difference between Plath's writing as a novelist and a poet. I think I really like these moments when it feels like there's almost this like flood of like cups and socks and towels that can kind of find their way in. And I think, sort of Doucette's work is quite similar in that sense. And really these intentions, I think, for me, feel like a really useful opening for kind of unseating maybe the expectation of what might come about as an artist that uses this term radical. Like I think I might have used it a couple of times already, this idea of representing radical sexualities or radical lifestyles. And I think like looking to these artists in particular, I'm really interested in how to kind of sort of frustrate that expectation of like glamorizing or romanticizing or exceptionalizing marginalized lives. So yeah, I think, yeah, coming back to sort of Julia Doucet, I think there are sort of like things that I maybe don't totally vibe with in our work, or kind of see in mine, which is this kind of nihilistic humour that I really enjoy but maybe don't necessarily relate to in lots of ways as a maker, and the sort of surreal violence in it. But I think, yeah, this way that she locates herself so sort of committedly and unabashedly, and with pride at points, in a kind of countercultural movement, and yeah, through all the drawn work that she's doing. And I think the other part of her work that really appealed to me, and still does, is the way that she kind of, yeah, was doing drawn, but also managed to like find this place in comics away from fine art practices, but then also within the comics world, she was kind of like, yeah, she was doing something really exceptional and different, and kind of distinct, because she was representing, you know, disability in her work, and sort of issues to do with gender, and sort of sexualities and bodies and bodily functions like periods and breasts that just like hadn't been represented in this way in comics, except but predominantly by yeah, often just sort of cisgendered straight men. But yeah, at the same time, I do think there's maybe something a little bit too easy about kind of the vision of a subculture as a kind of like messy New York artist in their 20s. And I think a lot of the stories often revolve around really tumultuous relationships to do with like negative, toxic codependency that for me sometimes is very much related to kind of a sort of souring of a sort of heteronormative monogamy. But yeah, I think it's a really good, yeah, it's a good jumping off point for me. I do kind of look at them a lot as like just kind of like how to draw things as well. I think she's just such an amazing draftsperson. So this is going to be another kind of break point for a sort of drawn prompt here. I am speaking of. Yeah, so for the next, if you've been following along, if you want to start here, that's also cool. What I would like to happen now is just kind of speaking of this sort of like detritus and debris and kind of everyday sort of little bits and bobs, bric-a-brac maybe. Yeah, just around the edge of your paper, I want you to just border it with just like a repeated item. So just sort of choose one thing. It could be your computer, a little kind of sketch of that, or a glass. Or you could pick maybe 2 or 3 things and repeat them and make them a pattern. So that's the next part, just to yeah, I'll try and do it on this rectangle. I've got to sort of border around it, around your first, whatever it was you chose, if you've done it to kind of represent friendship in some sense, and it's expanded and yeah, sometimes confusingly general sense. Yeah, so the next kind of reference point I was going to talk about amongst my own work, again kind of drawn from like what I take from like alternative comics, and especially comics by queer people. A big love of mine is a comic strip called Dykes to Watch Out For. It ran from through the 90s until about 2008, and it was about this group of queers, primarily lesbians, and they're all living through this, well, their own version of political tumult in the USA at that time, and it's all about all the sort of different relationships around this, shared homes, new friendships, fallouts, and family making. It runs at points concurrently, which is interesting for me as well, with Dirty Plot by Julia Doucet. So it kind of gives these sort of two visions of sort of 90s alt comics. But it was mainly published in sort of smaller run sort of community papers that don't really exist in the same way anymore. And yeah, one of the features that I really like about it is that often the way that the narrative goes, Alison Bechdel, who wrote it, will often like just populate the main action with all these like other sort of characters that aren't part of the main action, engaged in sort of some chore. Like this is number 68, and it's called Exclusive Engagement. And the two main characters, Clarice and Tony, are talking about this engagement that one of them really wants to happen, to get married at the laundrette. And there's this really nice mishmash of this sort of like sacred institution of marriage, and then this sort of humdrum of washing and laundry machines going on in the background. And I just really like how they're kind of located in like a little crowd, as well as doing this really everyday chore. And I think this kind of background activity lets the main action feel more embedded, and at points it just like melts into its environment or its surroundings. And for me, this brings back this sense of having protagonists in, you know, a work or a composition, but also finding this way to kind of like draw attention to the wider world, and like people living interconnected lives, even if the people don't know one another. And yeah, so kind of another as well as kind of like looking at these comic books and these beautiful artists that make them, the other part of kind of a kind of big tenet, I guess, of my thinking at the moment is also kind of related to some of the ideas of what's been referred to as visionary fictions. And this is a term that's been really kind of like given a lot of momentum to how to kind of make and think about generating images and I guess sort of work really in a general way. And it's a term that was coined by the two editors of a book called Octavia's Brood, and it's a collection of what these editors call visionary fiction, and it's an umbrella term that they coin, and it embraces a lot of genres, including sci-fi, fantasy, magical realism, and in this collection what they did was that they invited active members of social justice movements to contribute short fiction to this collection. And a lot of the people that wrote it hadn't necessarily written before this invitation, or written in a published way or a serious way in the way that they did for this collection. And I think one of the quotes from the book sums up quite well a lot of what happens within it. So the two editors, Walida Amirisha and Adrienne Marie Brown, what they say is all the writers are united by an attempt to experiment with new ways of understanding ourselves, the world around us, and all the selves and worlds that could be. And yeah, so that's the end quote. I think, this idea of visionary fiction, I kind of, maybe one way of thinking about it is sort of spin it around and making these kind of like fictional visions. And I quite feel, I guess, like with grown older as a sort of a queer person, or a person with a sort of minority racial identity, or kind of like ways that interact with gender, like it feels more and more significant as I kind of get longer in the tooth, and I feel more like I'm improvising and sort of creating anew. And I think this idea of sort of making these visions feels really integral to the process of being able to do that with agency and with a sense of power. As I think as a queer person in particular, this sort of departure from familiar scripts of living becomes more, not less, pronounced as people around me start thinking about marriage and become pregnant and move out the city. I think the ways I'm living now feel really chosen, but also increasingly unfamiliar. And I think, these kind of like sort of documenting and of like sort of fantasies, but also daily events, it really just begins to imagine what a life could look like that combines sort of non-family based, non-romantic bonds of care, of love and romance, but also sort of powerfully structuring a life around solitude as well as generous community. And I think I was just realizing that I think sometimes it feels like the sort of films and TV that I'm relating to are more often than not about a sort of like later in life divorcee. But yeah, it doesn't it doesn't really do the trick for me. So I think, yeah, a lot of the drawings for me are just a way of trying to kind of envision something beyond those scripts. Yeah, I think this sort of brings to light another methodology, and the word that maybe that I would use is oh, sorry, I'm just trying to get my laptop to charge. Short break. There we go. Okay. I panic over. Yeah, so I think it's this idea of mixing. Yeah, and relating to sort of some of the ways that, again, I'd kind of spoke earlier about sonic cultures and audio cultures and feeling inspired by them. And I think in this specific sense, I kind of see a lot of potential in a way of working. I was listening to the musician Jessie Lanza speak on the radio a couple of weeks ago, and she was asked a bit about just like how she came up with this song and kind of the way she described her studio audio practice just felt really familiar. So yeah, I'll just like I did with Sylvia Plath, I'll be Jessie Lanza for a few seconds. So what she said was that song was really me starting to experiment with modular and semi-modular equipment, which I assume just means synths. Trying to get in the process of going into my studio, capturing a whole period of time being there, then coming back, thinking a lot about editing. And then, yeah, she says she improvises a lot and then she edits. So she goes back, I capture those moments that have a spirit or music and something that's unique, even if it's a mistake. I was spending a lot of time doing that. Is her editing together, the machines did. I'm hoping you didn't lose me there. So yeah, I think, yeah, as well as yeah, to kind of move on from that idea of mixing, yeah, as well as like this idea of sort of making a schematic or a plan, for me, in these drawings, there's this related attempt to kind of like order or kind of like arrange or mix together different parts of a life. So I think there's this chance in drawing to kind of like take a snapshot, but also as also to like sort of collage together lots of maybe like different parts of experience or things that are imagined or things that have been seen in a picture or maybe something that comes to mind that you maybe half remember but also might be making up, or to bring together sort of different levels of sources. I think yeah, at one point I was kind of thinking about this, the drawing that sits up just now on the right, and something that came to mind was that, yeah, these kind of two characters walking and chatting, that there's something of like Sex in the City about it, and I think in this way, like the drawing becomes for me like a sort of reparative work. Like this, one of the characters might take something of someone from Sex in the City or the kind of friendships that it had in its mix, but then like it, yeah, without, I guess apart from right now, it doesn't credit it, but it doesn't really show that, it doesn't feel like they need to show, you know, like a kind of likeness to one of the actors in it. And I think like the show's become this like barrage of like problematic jags and pretty unwatchable in 2020, but yeah, there's kind of like ways that it's like threaded so like deeply into my ideas of like femininity and sexuality and community, and I think there's this, for me, just like these ideas of like lifting parts that I want and kind of like snapping off all the sort of conditions of commodification and sort of like sort of cis sexism and whiteness and kind of like, yeah, it feels like this, I don't know, I feel like I'm kind of breaking into this like institution to sort of steal some of its treasures that it never really deserved in the first place. Yeah, so yeah, that was kind of some ideas on like how I sort of mix together things in collage. Yeah, sort of like maybe garments or settings, and I think this drawing is a sort of good example of that, or a sort of vibe from a TV show, or kind of like a remembered lived experience, and sometimes a bit of both. But like in a kind of more material way, something I'd like to just sort of mention, kind of in relation to Julie Doucet as well, as just like drawing and anatomy, and like how I relate to like anatomy in the work that I do. And this is why these skeletons have kind of popped up at different points. These were drafts of the kind of skeleton that I wanted to include in one of the works I'll talk about, 28 Days of Pep, which was a lithographic print. But yeah, this notion of this kind of like cartoonish anatomy, but like sort of, yeah, including these skeletons and trying to kind of just imagine where like a rib cage might go, not really coming from, you know, a sense of sort of dissection or anything like that. And I think, yeah, comic book arts like Julie Doucet like have been a big like release for me, I think, because there's so much like meticulous imagination, but like not necessarily a relationship with like biology or textbooks. And I think, yeah, I think this notion of getting away from like a sort of correctness of musculature or bone structure or proportion, it feels really freeing for me. And I think again, it brings around this notion of maybe like bodies that aren't able to exist solidly or with a sense of stability or with like a sense of like self-image or straightforward being. Like there's something, again, like this notion of like dysmorphia, and which is obviously like such an, you know, powerfully negative emotion, but like also this sense of like how to kind of like bring that into how to relate to a body and an image as well, and like and the notion that like idealized bodies can often sort of trigger a sense of disidentification or unease. And I think, yeah, this feels very related to a sort of scientificized vision of bodies accurately rendered, and I think sort of feels like quite sort of emancipatory to sort of break that relationship of sort of science and visual art, especially with relation to Enlightenment ideas. Yeah, so I think in this notion of sort of making up an anatomy that sort of pragmatically works but doesn't necessarily follow stable ideas of proper proportion, I think for me there's this sense of like colluding with a sense of being or a way of being or identities that resist that kind of classification, and instead of sort of using representation as a way to sort of pin down a category or the identity of the figures I draw. So I think, you know, in real terms, like that often just works into a sort of sense of like maybe like ambiguity or kind of like no kind of like stable categorization sometimes of like the people and the pictures of their sort of gender or kind of what different parts of their identity might be. So I think that happens, but also like hopefully in a way that is sort of like comfortable and celebratory, and kind of like accepting. And that is why I would like to ask everyone, in your own way, on your own piece of paper, to just to have a go at drawing a skeleton and kind of like figure out that as a challenge. And see what happens, and try and figure out where trying that backward reasoning of all the parts that you might look for if you look for a skeleton, or just like where you feel some bones in your body. Kind of you can investigate it that way. And I feel like as a to just sort of contradict myself a little bit, while everyone's drawn the skeleton from their imagination, I do also just like really enjoy the process of drawing from life as well at points. And I think, like even though I might not like want to necessarily incorporate sort of conventional anatomical measures, I think this notion of like spending time looking and kind of engaging with people and things around you, yeah, that feels like something that's very integral to my practice, which is just a small point. And yeah, so I guess the kind of link to what's coming next is bodies, because I think, yeah, what I would like to speak a little bit about is some of like the intention behind documenting and representing and imagining sex and the work that I'm doing as well. And I think you know, there are hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years of sort of HD sex videos online now. So I feel like doing some kind of drawings about or of sex hopefully adds some variety to a kind of like overpopulated sort of the mainstream representations. Yeah, and this kind of brings us all the way to the promo image for the event. Yeah, and I think, yes, I've kind of got it up on screen now, which is, I think this may be the one that meant that we got the disclaimer at the start about the sexual content. And I remember when I first did it, I was kind of like a little bit sort of scared almost to show it to my partner at the time. It felt like it held a lot of some of like the fear or discomfort around sex, at the same time as showing like some fun and silliness around it. I don't think the characters or the figures or the players that are in it are immediately readable in lots of ways, worked up as well. And the couch kind of returns that idea of like drawn from life. It's kind of like a careful copying of the pattern of like the actual couch, kind of just like in my house. And yeah, I think I quite like that idea of just like this picture of passion, but then also having this sort of quite like, you know, sometimes quite like migraine just in level of copying these like little printed flowers on this sofa bed. Yeah, and I'd kind of been listening to this podcast of the painter Jordan Castile, and yeah, she'd been talking about that, just like how the patterns in our work, she really likes them, but they're just such a pain to do. And I just felt like really kind of motivated by this sort of admission of annoyance by this sort of very like exquisite painter, and yeah, kind of like inspired me to kind of have a go at just like sitting and looking at something for a very long time, trying to copy it accurately. Yeah, I think it just, yeah, it feels like this also, maybe this is part of the appeal of presenting the drawings in this way, to kind of think about how to include subject matter in a way that doesn't feel like singular. So like, I think, you know, I might have a drawing of sex at one point, but then also like it's within, you know, the broader practice that I have, which is drawings of, you know, like sort of joking about and sitting around and watching TV and just being kind of like goofy a lot of the time. And I think that feels like, yeah, something that I like to kind of draw on a lot of the time, which is how to kind of give this sense of like not just having a singular image. And maybe yeah, one of the works that kind of does that very formally was this work 28 Days of Pep, which I'll speak a wee bit more about just now. So this was, it's in A2 print, which I think will come on the screen shortly. And yeah, it was included in this sort of group exhibition called Queer Time School, and it is this kind of like document of sort of 4 weeks I spent taking a medication that's prescribed when there's a risk of HIV transmission. So there's part of it that kind of shows this like sort of, so here it's kind of slowly sort of creeping onto the screen. Yeah, part of it kind of shows a sort of sexual encounter, and then there's other parts where like blood's been taken, and oh, so it's the print just above this one, Eileen. So yeah, that's the one. This is one of the details of it, with the smoke and the river, and yeah, the kind of floating body. And yeah, so it kind of combined all these yeah, daily sort of practices of drawing, but then yeah, sort of collage them all together in this sort of singular image. And I think before this print, I'd kind of had this sort of hangover from making all these really bombastic painting installations that you know you still like, but that would combine all these sort of different oil paintings of different subject matters and different interiors and installations, and this was kind of the first time where I'd kind of sort of put that idea of like collage and multiple images kind of together, just in, you know, on a piece of paper in quite a light way. And it really kind of became a bit of a manifesto for things that I wanted to include and do, you know, still look back on it and kind of see these sort of intentions for what was going to come. And I think, yeah, just things like sort of like public health and like being at work, and just I think kind of coming to this idea of like how to sort of bring in the sort of everydayness, like sort of like, I think the centre of the picture now, there's like me kind of like explaining painfully to a co-worker like sort of being on this medication and kind of why I was feeling a little bit like under the weather because of its side effects. But at the same time, I also just like there's some pictures of Sailor Moon in there as well, and I think, yeah, there was just this idea of sort of like bringing together lots of very sort of perhaps like disparate elements, but finding ways to use like the composition to sort of bring them together, and also just sort of redrawn things like Sailor Moon in the same linear style as the rest of it. But I think, yeah, it kind of ends with the sort of like me sort of cycling off the corner at the bottom, and just kind of hanging around with my pal Alaya. And I think, yeah, it was just such a, yeah, it was meant to be this kind of like expanded infographic about this medication. So there's a sort of little bit of text outside just saying what it is, how you get prescribed it, and then almost this sort of like instruction, very kind of like subjective instruction manual on how to kind of deal with it and like deal with maybe some of the effects of it and take care of yourself while you're on it, because it's a really sort of powerful medication that can really mess up your liver as well. And I think, yeah, going from like this print and the drawings in it, and kind of backwards one step actually, and kind of my works to this collaborative print that I made with and while I was on the transmission committee, I think the methodology for this print, the 28 Days of Pep, yeah, it really came from this one that's coming up in blue on the screen. And this was a combination of drawings and text and transcribed conversations and scanned notes. And again, this was like using this like methodology of mixing that I was talking about before, and kind of, yeah, using disparate elements and bringing them together into a single composition, using careful composition and like sort of patient placement of these text and images. And the print itself, on that, like if you could kind of virtually flip it round, there's this photograph of the working desk that the committee used, and there's this relationship when you kind of like turn it over where like parts are traced. So there's like this sort of long rectangle on the screen just now, that's the keyboard. There's a kind of funny sort of almost like keyhole shape, and I think that's the phone from above. Then there's like the hard drive of the computer, the scanner, and then we used each of those again in this sort of like maybe like quite psychodynamic process of kind of breaking down associations of everyday or common occurrences, like using them as symbols for, you know, like the phone could be about connectivity, or the fact that it's got so many messages on it that haven't been answered, you know, a sense of like failure in that as well. And it was at a time when, yeah, transmission was really kind of the subject of a lot of news coverage because its funding stakes had went into precarity. So it also became a kind of way of sort of broadcasting the story of the gallery at the time, but doing it in a way that was also a plan for the future, and thinking about sort of compositionally how to kind of structure this image to kind of give a sense of what it was that we were working towards. So there's a tremendous amount of space in it, and there's a sense of wanting to kind of like clear the schedule a little bit and kind of make it a bit healthier. But there's also just like and excerpts from an article written by Alberta Whittle, who was also on the committee at the time, about how to work together and collaborate together. There's also sort of drawings that that I did of aloe vera, drawings that Alaya, my friend, did of like a beautiful waterfall in Lynn Park, and then sort of like all the committee members, Talani's included, sort of did these ink drawings of these shapes of these things in the desk. So it became this really kind of like mindful arrangement of ideas and elements as an expression of kind of like, and a symbol of like a style of working we were hoping to work towards and practice on a daily basis. So I think this methodology of the transmission print really kind of became this way of sort of gathering visuals and materials and imageries in a sort of ongoing way and collaging them together. And I think there's a text by Ursula Le Guin that has been, it's been really nicely kind of quoted a lot in the last few years. I'll just read a little part of it. It's a carrier bag theory of fiction, and I think it sort of speaks to some of the sort of the ideas I was speaking around, sort of Julia Doucet and Sylvia Plath, and this idea of like wanting to bring in sort of toothbrushes and kind of going to the supermarket into my work. So what she says is, I'm going to be Ursula Le Guin now in my kind of repertoire of like women's voices I'll embody tonight. I came lugging this great heavy sack of stuff, my carrier bag full of wimps and klutzes and tiny grains of things smaller than a mustard seed, and intricately woven nets, which when laboriously unknotted are seen to contain one blue pebble, an imperturbably functioning chronometer telling the time on another world, and a mouse skull, full of beginnings without ends, of initiations, of losses, of transformations and translations, and far more tricks than conflicts, far fewer triumphs than snares and delusions, full of spaceships that get stuck, missions that fail, people that don't understand. I said it was hard to make a gripping tale of how we treated the wild oats from their husks. I didn't say it was impossible. Whoever said writing a novel was easy. And this comes after Le Guin speaks about the fact that the first piece of technology wasn't the spear, but like the carrier bag to kind of take wild oats and nuts home when you wanted to like feed the baby, but it was raining and you didn't want to go outside and get more oats. And and she kind of says she wants to make novels that way. So rather than having these like, sort of protagonists straight line from start to finish, that it can be this process of failed missions and kind of a kind of collection of sort of moments and details and encounters that come together, like a coalescence rather than a kind of explosive blockbuster action film. So I think this idea of thinking about little recurrences and motifs in my work in particular. I think about just like the fact that like riding a bike comes up a lot in my work and cycling so often, and I really like that. It feels like a sort of like just start bringing out these details and being like, why are they in there? And I think it kind of sort of comes back to me, this idea of like sort of like antique technology being a sign of like contemporary futuristic ideas of the city in response to ideas of climate change. And but also just like on a technical level, like the bike is just like quite a complex object to draw on. I think I get a lot of satisfaction from trying to simplify it, and I think that makes it kind of like satisfying to look at as well. I'm sort of getting towards the end. I realise that time is marching on. I hope we're okay. But I wanted to speak about just like I was going to talk about this idea of sort of the scene voice, which is like kind of like getting to see the speaker when you have this relationship of dialogue and image. And yeah, I was kind of reading Dykes to Watch Out For, and kind of, yeah, it really brought out this sense of what can the possibility of drawn and kind of like drawn figures and given, yeah, speech as well. And I think this idea of like envisioning yeah, certain identities that maybe like aren't conventional, aren't seen a lot, like feels like an important moment of representation. And I just took this note when I was reading one of the issues of Dykes to Watch Out For, which I'll read out. So one of the characters is called Lois, and she's yeah, kind of butch lesbian. So the way Lois is dressed, the comics form allows for a continual reminder that she is butch. It doesn't let you read Lois and just imagine Terry Hatcher and Superman as Lois Lane in a skirt suit with a shiny brunette bob. The illustrations are continual visual pointers at the style and identity of each character. So yeah, I think, yeah, so this sort of little comic that I made for an application here was kind of speaking a little bit about this and trying to do it as well. So I was reading All About Love by Bill Hooks, which is in the comic on the screen, and I was starting to understand how much of the discourse that I was being inspired by was like really textual and like these ways to sort of structure a life and my own life. And I think what I was realizing was yeah, it was really good to get the sort of principles and structures of thought, but like what could these ideas look like or sound like in practice, and like what clothes might, you know, a person wear to feel this kind of body positivity that's suggested in these principles, or kind of align with a non-binary gender identity, or like, you know, what does it look like to sort of weaken and redirect patriarchal holds and signifiers of authority, and like what does a socialist interior decor look like? What about a friendship that pleasurably resists white supremacist ideals? You know, like, yeah, I just wanted those kind of visions. And I think yeah, I think with this notion of difficulty that Ursula Le Guin talks about, and making yeah, sort of these novels around these ideas of like collecting small moments rather than the kind of the big bombastic blockbuster action. Like I think it is difficult to make you know, a vision of a kind of like pleasurable life that is also principled and, you know, deconstructs patriarchy and white supremacy, and you know, follows tenets of socialism and collaboration. But it's not impossible. Like Ursula Le Guin says, it's difficult but not impossible. And I think, yeah, a lot of times in my drawings, I'm sort of pushing against, hopefully, like a sense of like the crustiness of ethical living, you know, and pulling together sort of daily living of social justice, and envisioning a life that is rich and full and finds new possibilities for excitement and novelty and a sense of style and pleasure that can align with fairness in progressive politics. Yeah, and I think yeah, I think, yeah, the other kind of part of what I wanted to speak a little bit about was yeah, some of the kind of like vulnerability of drawing. So I think kind of like cooling down that kind of sort of urge to kind of get quite high energy and manifesto like there, which can be easy to do sometimes. Yeah, I would have really loved to have come and seen the John show. Unfortunately, Tier 4 kicked in. But I think just kind of returning to in Glasgow and sort of Nancy's work, Nancy Haslam's Chance. And yeah, I think kind of reminds me of the times when it is difficult to make work and to kind of draw and represent something that feels like, yeah, like hard to show or to speak about, and kind of try and make a picture instead of it. And I don't think it's a very predictable way of representing things, especially not for me. And I think drawing isn't really an activity that rewards strategic thinking a lot of the time, or hard resolve. And more often than not, it's a process of sort of teasing out and kind of like trying not to hesitate too much, but also like taking a lot of care. I think of it as quite a dark art. And there's not a lot of like tech to rely on to add bells and whistles. Mostly what helps is observation, paying attention, and not trying to follow too many straightforward lines of reasoning. Yes, I think, yeah, just to kind of sort of round off some of the drawings that I've hopefully some people have been doing. Yeah, I'd like it if you drew something that you think is really hard to draw, and like maybe it's something that kind of finished you off as a teenager when you kind of maybe stop drawing, if that's true of some of you. Yeah, something like noses or eyes. But yeah, just maybe even it helps to like put it in a context. So don't worry about drawing it in like full high definition, and just take it like one mark and one line at a time. So yeah, I'm winding up now. So yeah, the last thing that I want to kind of talk about is like just the presences of some of the characters that come out in these drawings. Like there's two on the screen now. Yeah, one is this sort of like really wicked angel, and then this weightlifter. I get quite attached to them, and I don't know if this is sort of peak lockdown, but yeah, the angel on the screen kind of came out from listening to this song called Gabriel by Roy Davis featuring Pevin Everett. It's a really sort of like good dance tune. And yeah, and it was this moment of like seeing sort of angel and then immediately kind of transcribing it into drawing, and it felt really visionary. And like I think that's often, I just still don't fully understand like, yeah, that process of like almost like haunting or kind of like summoning. And then like another kind of character that I wanted to kind of bring out and kind of bring up before I finish was this sort of like lone diner. And yeah, this was like, yeah, it's just someone sort of dining alone, yeah, on in a sort of remote place. You can hopefully through the windows you can kind of see a car, and it was from a memory of a solo holiday to Butte and ordering some food while I was sort of riding around the island on a bike that I found outside the Airbnb there. And I remember, yeah, like that kind of was one of the sort of beginnings of it. And yeah, sometimes like it kind of came from this sort of intense moment of, I don't know, just like presence when that was happening, and it kind of always stuck with me, and then came out with this little like sort of fictional vision of it. And yeah, so I think I'm just going to kind of round off by sort of returning to where I started, and then with a quote from the Roland Barthes book. So I'm just going to say again that paragraph that I began with, that came out when I was in this sort of cat sitting animation mode. I often feel out of time, too early for the wonder to come, too late for ancestors' forgotten radical lives. I draw to populate my life with the futurity that for me is posthumous, and the past socially repressed and oppressed. They are plans, dreams, and survival strategies. I'm going to read some of this. June 13th, 1978. Not to suppress mourning, suffering, the stupid notion that time will do away with such a thing, but to change it, transform it, to shift it from a static stage, stasis, obstruction, recurrences of the same thing, to a fluid state. Okay, so that's everything that I wanted to say to you. Thanks very much, everyone, for drawing along and coming along, and yeah, apologies for running so wildly over time. I'm just seeing the chat now. Oh, that's so nice. Nancy's here. That's really lovely. Maybe I'll just hand it over to you, Sophia, to sort of take us into the next part of the evening. Yeah, what little left.
Thank you, Adam. Thanks so much for so generously sharing your thoughts and your work, and choreographing these events with your drawing and thoughts. That's really beautiful. I love those movements you actually presented through the with help from Eileen as well, and that gives us a chance to really look into details of those drawings, but also this whole idea of drawing as a tool to envision the possibilities and the alternatives that comes through so strongly. And also drawing is acting as a supporting structure, not only for yourself, but building up a community around us as well. I think that's really much needed sort of thoughts at the moment for all of us. And I think we're gonna invite everybody, if you have any responses or questions for Adam, or would like to share some ideas, popped along, or share your drawings on the screen, please do. And you can pop your responses or questions in the chat box, or please just raise your hand, and because we really want this, and Adam really would like this to be a sort of a roundtable discussion, or a chatting in our living rooms or bedrooms or whatever. So please do join us if you would like to have a conversation together.
Yeah, thank you. Oh yeah, and I just noticed that Rob Price noticed that. Oh, sorry. Did someone start speaking? Oh yeah, that there was one drawn prompt that I skipped, and maybe it was. Yeah, I can leave this one with you. Maybe it's one good to do in private. So I'll just copy and paste it here. And it was meant to go with the little bit that I was speaking about sex. So it was a prompt to, somehow represent what that could mean to you. And I said, even if it's just a tangle of hands, lips, and closed eyes and feet. So there you go, Rob. So that's 4 for 4 now. You didn't miss one. I missed one. So thanks for that.
And Adam, we've got a hand up from Nat Walpole.
Yes. Hello.
Hiya. How you doing?
Good. Yeah, nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you as well. I just wanted to ask, I don't think I've seen anything from you, but have you ever done like a long form comic or anything like that?
No, all my comics are like sort of like always like 2 or 3 pages or something. Like I feel like still very much like really like, again, sort of the Julie Doucette way of just like these sort of like vignettes. But I mean, I think it feels like where I'm going a little bit. But I don't. Sometimes I'm a bit like contradictory. Sometimes I feel a bit like sometimes the expectation to kind of like get to, the summit of kind of comics, doing this long form one. I'm almost like, oh no, I'm just gonna stay in these little short comic strips. But we'll see. I think if it could feel right, I would definitely be interested in that. I think, I always kind of have these like ideas for them, but usually have too many ideas and just do lots of little things. Thanks.
No worries.
Cool. There's a question in the chat as well. I don't know if you can see that, Adam. Someone's asking to follow up on the Sylvia Plath quote. She said something about a novel is an open hand, but a poem is a closed fist. Do you think there's a place for a closed fist in the seeking to live in a soft way? It's really beautiful sentiment there.
Yeah, that is a really good one. And I think, it's something that I very much think about in a case-to-case way. I think there are friends who I can see that are often the closed fist that I need in my life. And sometimes rely on people around me to kind of like bring that. I think but I do think there is there is definitely a place for the kind of like some of maybe that like meanness that I think Sylvia Plath describes like within poetry, the sense of like a very exacting sense of what needs to happen. And I think to maybe sort of answer your question, like with reference to maybe that quotation from the musician I mentioned, that there's a sense of like going between like a kind of like free, like improvisational, like kind of living free and easy, and then kind of changing hats sometimes, and just really kind of becoming quite direct and trying to kind of measure what it is you're actually doing against principles. And I think it can be quite like a hard one to manage and to call when you kind of overdo one or overdo the other. But I think, yeah, definitely, I find that balance in friendship and community for sure. Yeah, I think I need to be called out sometimes if someone's a bit like, you're being a bit soft. And at the same time, if I'm if I'm being a bit too mean or a bit too close-minded, I think, yeah, I get that fed back to me sometimes as well. But yeah, I think that's a really beautiful way of enunciating a lot of what I was getting at. Thank you so much, Flannery, Andrea, Kafka.
You're welcome to come in as well if there was anything you wanted to add to that question.
For sure.
Adam, I was thinking about the relationship, the dialogues between your writing and your drawing, because you also mentioned, Roland Barthes, that beautiful book, The Morning Diaries. And then I was thinking about drawing perhaps as a way of writing, but the writing as a kind of depiction of the narration in your mind or in your daily life as well. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that was a question that sort of maybe anticipated, but I only realised now that maybe I didn't really think through an answer. Yeah, I think it's been interesting. Yeah, with kind of the last week, because on Friday I was invited to run this writing seminar, and then this was kind of the other. So I feel like my brain's kind of been sort of in these two levels of thinking about drawing really intensively, but then thinking about my processes of writing as well, and it kind of framed that seminar around the title automatic writing, and I was thinking a lot about this idea of like psychics and spiritualists who, you're supposed to kind of like, get, I was going to use these scissors as a pen, and you kind of like rest a pen on the paper, and then you kind of see what comes up. And I think for me, like, often writing can be like so much more like conscious or something, or so much more like I can plan it, and I can kind of, it feels safer, and I can kind of control it. And I think at one point in the talk I kind of referred to, I got this like manifesto high energy moment before I started talking about just like how drawing's really difficult. And I think sometimes it almost feels like that kind of open closed fist that you referred to, Andrea, the sense of like sometimes with writing I feel like I can really kind of be so like in control, and then like with drawing I feel like I need to kind of like tap into much more like of a place of like, yeah, softness and maybe vulnerability and like openness to just like making something really ugly that I can't just delete. Like I think I do most of my writing on the laptop, so it's, you also get that sort of perfect glowing outcome, whereas working on paper, which you see in the kind of the big collage, it's like all these different funny shades of white and lined paper and different kinds of paper, like it feels a lot more like scrappier in some ways for me. And I think it brings out something where I don't have as many answers, and I think that's often what I like about it, and it kind of taps into like more imagistic ways of thinking, but like, yeah, again, like working between the two of them feels quite powerful sometimes. To be able to like do a talk like this about the drawings feels like such a release of some of the ideas that are in there, and kind of, but then it also like there's only so far I can talk about drawing before I need to kind of like show drawing and kind of do it. So I feel like they kind of play off each other, one being quite like organized, another one that's sort of emotional disarray. And I think that kind of is, just me, like like kind of those two sides. And I think that's why it feels so good to have both as outlets at points.
Thank you. And also the drawing always have this sense of open-endedness as well, the flux nature and the provisional kind of nature of it really opens up sort of a ground, not only for, for drawing as an action itself, or but as an experience, as a thinking experience. I found it's really enriching and empowering as well.
Yeah, completely. I feel like there's something coming up, maybe like related to it. Yeah, from that. I'm just reading the question at the side.
Yeah.
So
Shall I read it out if Nat's posting it? So it says, do you think there's something about drawing as a conceptual space, like because you're working in symbols and forms rather than writing, which is more linguistic, words equal meaning, whereas your drawings are more ambiguous? So yeah, that really leads off of what you were just talking about, I suppose.
Yeah, it feels like it. Yeah, I think it's interesting. It makes me kind of think about the way that poetry as well, like as a form of writing, and thinking about Sylvia Plath and kind of carrying her with me for a long time, and this notion of how to kind of get these two spaces to sometimes do something else than what they're kind of expected to do. And I think with writing, I think it is like really interesting. I was working on with my wonderful friend and collaborator Isabella Shields on kind of just like reading some beautiful writing that she's doing for a novel. And one of the kind of phrases that we talked a lot about was oh gosh, I feel like I said it earlier on, and I'm trying to kind of remember it again. It was this idea of like a kind of like interior sense of like logic, or an interior like basis for like that you give the reader enough to make them think that there's a kind of structure of rationality they just can't get to, but if they read along enough they'll get to it. Because Isabel's working on a kind of horror novel at the moment, and I think that's a really beautiful way to take writing, and to kind of like use all those expectations that you're going to get this sort of like logic and like a kind of an answer out of it, but then like frustrate that as well. And I think like, so that's kind of like sort of trying to turn writing on its head, but then also with like drawing, I think one of the reasons that maybe I'm kind of really interested in someone like Alison Bechdel is because she is such a like visual communication person. Like she kind of like builds these quite like stable worlds where you have like coat hooks and scarves hanging up, and like they all work in this like bookshop that's really kind of like always rendered with such a like intention and like kind of idea of what that space is, and then it becomes this real kind of like way of world building, and a real kind of like very like has such like a network of meaning that's so strong. And I think that feels like maybe like one way of thinking about your question, which is like that drawing can be this kind of like more ambiguous space, but then it can suddenly become like such a kind of architecture of like a very stable vision, but then also like writing, whereas it kind of has that logic and reasoning, and it can sometimes like like in kind of like ghost stories and horror fiction turn that in its head and just leave you feeling quite like perturbed and afraid without much of a sense of what's happening, but like in a really beautiful way.
Oh, great, Adam. We've got a question from Cheryl.
Sure. Okay.
Oh, Cheryl, you're still on mute if you want to.
There we go. I was just wondering, I'm quite fascinated by concepts of authenticity, but when you're operating in queer spaces and in counterculture and such, even the dirt and the debris gets romanticized. So I was wondering, outside of medium, because obviously you mentioned using pen and not being able to erase mistakes and stuff, if there's any way to kind of mentally avoid romanticizing the dirt and debris of, like, how do you make the distinctions between authenticity and romanticization?
Yeah, I mean, I think that idea of like it kind of it comes, I feel like that's like the next step, which is like not sort of glamorizing that sort of like especially like queer identity, but then also like not finding like the kind of like glamorization of the unglamorous identity, which I guess kind of like it sort of hints at maybe like the sort of continuing like recommodification of that identity, which is like even like the kind of the sort of countercultural version of it suddenly like becomes very like mainstream. But I guess in the drawing, I think that kind of, maybe I don't want to kind of just like use what I've said before as an answer, but like I think it kind of comes back to that sense of like maybe not kind of like taking the mick a little bit, like with the materials in particular. Like I think it's yeah, there's like ways that like you can kind of hint at kind of like vulnerability and like a sense of like maybe like messiness like within technique, but then also like, you know, at points just kind of like working out where I lie in terms of like how much can I kind of like, you know, like get away with under this like banner of like, you know, like sort of queer radical freedom, and like just being a bit like, no, but I want it to be like to communicate and to be good. So I think in some of it, yeah, it kind of like maybe comes back to that sort of like closed, I'm going to use your idea again, Andrea, that sort of closed open fistness, which is like, yeah, a point kind of, you know, kind of being quite like maybe like seduced by that sense of like a kind of messy, like sort of Jack Halberstam queer art of failure vision of queerness, but then at the same time like trying to sort of bring it back and kind of, you know, at moments to something that feels like actually productive and like actually like maybe that can be transformative in some way, and not just kind of like the aesthetic of transformativity, you know, like, and I think that feels like, you know, a really kind of big kind of measure to hold like my own work against and like other people's work against, to be honest. But I think you're very right that it has to be a question. I think, yeah, the kind of like the line of when that is and isn't happening is like often arguable, but like I think has to be called out when you really feel like, hey, this is like, this isn't, you know, this isn't the kind of like, yeah, wonder that it thinks it is, you know, kind of demanding better of your community. Yeah, thank you.
So I wonder if there are any more responses from everybody, anybody?
Yeah, thank you everyone for staying over time.
A comment here from Rosie saying, Adam, thanks for such a considered talk and presentation and prompt. If you haven't read it already, I was reminded of Chantal Ackerman's My Mother Laughs when you were talking about the Bart's laugh, space for debris. It's full of shopping lists. Yes. Yeah. And Rob was asking if anyone's wanting to share their drawings. Maybe that's a nice thing to do.
Oh, I see some. Gonna have to like pin people to see them. Oh, oh my god, that's a lovely horse. Oh wow, that's some hand from Rona. I feel like that's the hard thing that you're sharing, Rona. Oh wow, some of these are like really, really stunning. They all kind of are. Wow. I don't feel like I have enough time to see them all. Oh, so many people did it. Thank you so much. Like, wow. That's a beautiful portrait from Annie, and skeleton from Megan. Brilliant. Another skeleton. Oh, wow. Damon's skeleton, something else. Rob's hand as well, pointing. Oh. So fab. Oh, a bike. Good one. Oh, yeah. Bikes are hard. Hands are hard. Oh, so great. I've just got these little videos, but I'm like kind of totally moved and overwhelmed, but I kind of thought everyone would just like listen along. Oh, thank you so much, Andrea. Just clocking yours as well. Oh,
that's really lovely. Someone put it on the sofa or bed.
yeah.
Drawing. It's really nice.
Oh yeah, pinned it. Oh wow. Oh wow.
I think
Brilliant. I
it's
feel like
fantastic. Thanks very much for sharing it.
Thank you. Ah, that was really nice. I didn't expect that. Fab. Amazing.
So, Adam, do you think perhaps we should draw to the close for this evening?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you very much to everyone before we sort of whisk ourselves away. Yeah, I've had amazing support from you guys, Sophia, Peter, Alison, Aileen for sticking with me today as I kind of sent you like redone versions of that massive collage. So like, thank you so much. It's been such a great experience putting this together.
Thank you, Adam, for such a wonderful, warm and stimulating session, and left us with all these reflections on our relationships with ourselves, with others, and with the world, through drawing. And I think that's really beautiful. And a big thank you to everybody for joining us this evening. So before we go, so I'm going to do my duty. So the exhibition of Trinity Boyle Wolf Drawing Prize 2020 still on. It will be until next Saturday. So if you are around in Dundee, or if you are able to travel, so the exhibition is still there. And also there will be a Duncan Jordanstone public lecture on Thursday, next week, Thursday, 17th of December at 6 p.m. featuring artist Emma Talbot, who was a selector for Trinity Boyle Wolf Drawing Prize in 2014, then what's called the Jode Drawing Prize. And Emma's having a solo exhibition at DCA will be open very soon. So the public lecture information will be on the Jordanstone's website, and we will publicize it through our social media close to the time as well. So please watch the space. And then the postal arts inspired the participatory project by the Drawing Prize shortlisted artist Nina Chow, still ongoing, a prompt for drawing. There's still time to request a handmade prompts by Nina, so please email exhibitions@dundee.ac.uk if you would like to have one. So thanks again, everybody, and thank you, Adam, for sharing your drawings and thoughts with us. So this will be the last event of our public engagement program at Cooper Gallery for Trinity Boyle Wolf Drawing Prize. And another heartfelt thanks to everybody for your ongoing support, for being a regular visitor and participant of our public engagement program. And hopefully we will see you at the exhibition for the next few days, and for our forthcoming exhibition next year.
Okay.
So
yeah,
thank you,
so much
everybody.
to everyone in the audience. Yeah, I'm just like furiously copying and pasting these chats. But yeah, really glad to share this meeting and evening with everyone. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.